Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to watch my abbreviated CTLS presentation on a Chromebook world serving underrepresented students, right? So with this big transition online that we have going on during the spring 2020 semester, it's important to keep in mind that there are some students that not only may not have Wi-Fi access, at least stable Wi-Fi access, but there may also be students out there using machines or personal devices such as Chromebooks that cannot take advantage of a lot of the applications that we may take for granted, such as Microsoft Office apps like Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, right? So let's hop right into the presentation. So the impetus of this presentation was off the heels of this email that I received from a student in my class during fall 2019, where the student cited that they have a very old Chromebook that does not have Microsoft Word on it. Okay. When I read the syllabus and saw the papers have to be turned in as a Word document, I asked someone if I could share my essay with them in Google Drive and have them paste it into a Word document for me so that I would be able to turn it in. By the time they did and got it back to me, it was too late, and I was really, really upset. Now, aside from the fact that this student didn't really handle that situation appropriately, right? They should have reached out to their professor instead of working with their friend in this regard. It's begging a big, larger issue here, right? The larger issue at hand here is that this student does not have access to a full-fledged desktop version of Microsoft Word, right? And this, as I suggested, was really the impetus of this entire project, right? The Chromebook users are having a difficult time getting things done on our Microsoft Office apps, which is important because at RVCC, we have a contract with Microsoft that we can offer to students free versions of Word, PowerPoint, and Excel, but Chromebook users cannot quite take advantage of these services in the same way that Mac or Windows people can. Okay. So before I get into this issue a little bit more broadly, I want to talk about what Chromebooks are, right? Especially for people a little bit unfamiliar about these devices. Okay. So Chromebooks, in essence, are fundamentally a web browser, right? They're fundamentally a web browser. Right now, they do have some capacities to run Android apps, although a little bit limited, as I will suggest a little bit later on this slide. They're fundamentally just a Chrome web browser. So to give you an idea of what it's like to be a Chromebook user, on your Mac or Windows machine, if you're running the Chrome browser, imagine having to get everything you do done on a daily basis just using the Chrome browser, right? You cannot open up Microsoft Office app or apps or any other application on your device. Everything has to be done within the Chrome web browser. That is how they get things done, okay? They're also cloud-based applications, right? So because everything is getting done in the Chrome web browser, right, they're relying on online services such as Google Docs, Google Sheets, and Google Slides to get work done, okay? They also run some Android apps, right? So, for example, they can run a Microsoft Word Android app, but the Microsoft Word Android app is definitely very limited in functionality, to say the least, and is not recommended on these devices. Okay, because typically the Microsoft Word Android app is suited more for a mobile device than it is for a laptop. Okay, and that's a big part of the reason why it's not recommended. These devices are also fairly affordable, right? So we're talking in many instances, devices that are less than $200, right? So Chromebooks are literally a more affordable option than a Mac or a Windows computer. And with this in mind, who are Chromebook users, right? Well, typically Chromebook users are low income students who cannot afford a Mac or a Windows device, right? And these Chromebooks can be very appealing to them because it allows them to gain access to some sort of machine without having to completely break their bank. Okay. Now, these are also typically the students that have to decide whether they're going to purchase their textbooks or whether they're going to eat a meal at dinner tonight, right? And that's, of course, very troubling and that's concerning to us. And as faculty, we want to do anything we can to alleviate some of these concerns for our students, right? So they gravitate towards these devices. But the biggest problem with this is if low income students are gravitating towards Chromebook devices that cannot run full-fledged versions of Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. They're unable to take advantage of the contract that we have with Microsoft to provide them with free, full-fledged desktop versions of Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. So in addition to these students being underrepresented and also at-risk populations, they're using machines that don't allow them to take advantage of the services that we take for granted at RVCC, and that's certainly a problem. So what are some of the other limitations of Chromebooks? Well, they are very reliant on the internet, for one. Okay, so this was a much bigger problem when Chromebooks first came out back in the early 2010s. A little bit less so now, but it's still somewhat of an issue where Chromebook users cannot get work done if they're not connected to the internet, right? Because they're relying on websites such as Google Docs, Sheets, and Slides to get their work done. And if there's no internet, those applications online are limited to say the least. Couple that with the fact that low-income students also often have unstable internet access, and we run into an issue here where the students that are relying on are using devices because they're affordable cannot get work done on those devices because their internet is not stable enough to do so. Okay, it just creates problem after problem after problem. Many of them also have fairly slow processors, especially if they're older Chromebooks. And this has implications for online courses, right? Because many online courses by necessity require students to watch videos, do activities online, participate in discussions. And this can be somewhat challenging for the Chromebook user who has a processor that's very slow and just can't simply keep up with the rest of the students in the classroom. They also cannot run Mac or Windows applications. Okay, so in addition to not being able to run full desktop versions of Word, PowerPoint, or Excel, they can't run any Mac or Windows applications that maybe you and I can in our daily lives. Okay. They're also lacking MS Office, right? And this is really the critical problem here, right? Because as I suggested before, at RVCC, we have a contract with Microsoft that enables us to give them free, full desktop versions of Microsoft Office, but they can't take advantage of those services in the same way that Mac or Windows people can. Now, there are some workarounds to this, as I'm going to be discussing a little bit later, to the extent to which Chromebook users can use online versions of MS Office, but there are some limitations with online MS Word and Excel as well, as I'll be hinting at a little bit later. So to assess the severity of this issue on campus, I sent a survey out to RVCC students about which type of personal computer do they use to complete coursework, as well as to what extent are they having difficulty completing assignments if their professor requires them to turn assignments in using MS Office apps. Now, I got a sample here of 152 students, right? So a fairly large sample. And what we see here is the largest segment of the RVCC population are using Windows devices. The second largest are Apple Mac devices. A very small segment of the population is relying on a tablet, but then we have about 10% of RVCC students relying on Chromebooks, right? So certainly a minority, but a still sizable minority nevertheless, right? And if our goal here at RVCC is to serve all students, regardless of whether they're in the minority or if they're underrepresented, this is still something we want to pay attention to. There's approximately 10% of our student body that may be having trouble completing assignments using MS Office apps, right? So let's take a look at what the data suggests. So we find here that Chromebook users do report a slight tendency to have difficulty completing assignments using MS Office relative to Windows or Mac people, okay? Now, this is interesting in and of its own right, but I think what's potentially more interesting outside of just this is what Chromebook users are saying in open-ended reports, right? So let's take a look at the open-ended responses. So this one student said that the Microsoft programs did not work with my Chromebook. Luckily, I have an older laptop that works well enough for me to complete the project assignments, right? So we have a student here that literally couldn't use their Chromebook to complete assignments, presumably their professor required them to submit their assignments via MS Office app. So they had to return to an older Windows laptop likely to get work done. Okay, that's not very desirable. This other student commented, I cannot download software onto the computer due to its design of being cloud-based. So I have to use the online version of Microsoft Office that does not contain a lot of important features to make completing assignments easy, and sometimes it's not even possible to begin with, right? This is very noteworthy because it's echoing something I mentioned before about why don't Chromebook users just use Microsoft Office online, right? They could use Word online, PowerPoint online, Excel online. However, as the student's noting here, those online versions of Microsoft Office sometimes are missing important features for them to complete assignments, right? So there could be instances where Chromebook users are getting points off on their assignments because they literally don't have access to a device that has the features to complete those assignments the way the professor wants. Okay. Finally, we have a student here noting that Chromebooks are based off of Google Docs. So when professors ask to submit assignments in Microsoft Word, okay, it requires more work. Typically, instead of working on MS Office, I'll use Google Drive and convert it afterwards, right? So this student is citing how Chromebook users get things done, right? So if their professors give them a Microsoft Word document, right, what they do is that they have to convert that Microsoft Word document into a Google Doc, right, through Google Drive, and then they work on it from there. So the general way in which Chromebook users are getting things done is by converting in between Google Docs and Microsoft Word. But as I'm going to suggest a little bit later on in this presentation, there's some limitations and problems with doing that as well. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the Chromebook user's world. How do they get things done? Well, as that student was suggesting, they're relying on Google services, right? So they have Google Docs, which is their substitute for Microsoft Word. They have Google Slides, which is their substitute for Microsoft PowerPoint. They have Google Sheets, which is their substitute for Microsoft Excel. They have Gmail, which is their substitute for Outlook email. They have Google Calendar, which is their substitute for Outlook Calendar. And they have Google Drive, which is their substitute for Microsoft OneDrive. Now, it's important to point out that Chromebook users can simply use online versions of Microsoft Office, right? So they could use Word online, PowerPoint online, Excel online. They could use Outlook email online, Outlook calendar online, and of course also use OneDrive online, right? So there are options for them in this Microsoft world, but it's easier for them to get things done using Google's technological ecosystem, okay? So what are Chromebooks doing here? Well, as I suggested before, they're converting their documents in between Google Docs and Microsoft Word and back and forth, right? So if they receive a Word document from their professor, they'll convert it into a Google Doc and vice versa, right? Once they're done working on their Google Doc, they'll convert it into a Microsoft Word document and send it to their professor. And that all seems okay and fine and dandy, but there are sometimes issues where this transition, right, from a Google Doc into an MS Word document isn't always so smooth. Let me give you an example. So here's a paper I received from a student back during fall in 2019, where you'll see here that this is supposed to be the title page, but they have content on the title page. Okay, that shouldn't be there, right? The content should be starting on this next page here. But the problem is in a Google Doc, it looks okay. But when they convert from a Google Doc into an MS Word doc, that's when they run into these formatting problems. And I get tons and tons of emails from Chromebook users about they're having trouble formatting their document in a way that when they convert it into a Word document, it looks okay, right? It looks accurate. It's the way it should be, right? There's a lot of formatting problems. When I see things like this, I know instantly who's a Chromebook user, right? Because these are very common issues that Chromebook users face, right? They have some formatting problems. Now, on top of that, when we get to the grading aspect of this, right, Chromebook users could potentially be having points taken off of their papers, because when their professors see this, they're like, oh, that's not okay, right? I'm going to take a few points off because the formatting is off. But for a Chromebook, they may not have any idea how to solve these problems. Now, there are ways to solve these problems, and I know how to solve these problems, and I work with my students if they're having trouble. But to the average Chromebook user, and maybe even for the average faculty member who has no idea about how these devices work, these can be very difficult issues to resolve. Okay. So, what can we do? All right. Well, I think we need to move to a more universal design system, right? So to use this analogy here, this very common analogy for universal design, here we have maybe a Windows person, right? We have a Mac person in the middle, and then we have the Chromebook user, right? And the Mac and the Windows people can see over the fence just fine, but the Chromebook user is having difficulties, right? They can't see over the fence, right? So the logical thing for us to do here, at least intuitively, is to give them some boxes to stand on, right? Leverage them a little bit to allow everyone to see over the fence. But I think a better solution to this is, instead of leveraging them up, right, propping them up, what if we create a technological ecosystem where everybody can see, everybody can get work done regardless of what computer that they're using, right? This really is the goal. So how do we move here? Well, let me give you a few examples of solutions. The literal easiest thing you can do is that when you are requiring your students to submit papers online via Canvas, perhaps, instead of restricting file uploads to just an MS Word document, also click this checkbox here to allow them to submit a website URL, right? So the way in which Chromebook users share their Google Docs or Google Slides or Google Sheets is by sharing a website URL to other people, right? So when you enable them to do that, they don't have to worry about converting their Google Doc into an MS Word document. They can share with you the paper as it's intended to be seen, right? So this is literally the easiest thing you can do to help our Chromebook users submit their assignments in the way they want to be viewed, okay? What can you also do? Well, another thing you can do is encourage Chromebook users to use Microsoft Office Online. Now, I did note that there was that student that mentioned a problem where there's certain features of MS Office Online that are lacking relative to the full desktop versions of those apps. And that is true. Like, there are some features here that are a little bit limited. However, I do believe that there are some aspects of Word Online that can service them well, particularly if there are instances, as you see here, where they're just required to write an essay, right? So if all they have to do is write a standard essay with a title page, a body, a conclusion, a references page, Microsoft Word Online, as you see here, should perfectly suffice for those assignments, right? So they have ability to align center, align left. They can change the line spacing. They can change whether there's any indents, such as hanging indents, which are very useful for creating references. Can change the fonts, change the font size. And when they are ready to submit this document to you, right, this is MS Word Online, they can go to File and they can save it as a Microsoft Word document and then just share that file with you. Or what they typically do is hit the share button here, right? So they'll hit the share button and they type in your email address. I'm just going to put mine in here. And here I go, I pop up, and then they'll share this online MS Word link with you, right? In a very similar way that they would share a Google Doc with you, right? So this is something else they can do. If they're having trouble converting their Google Doc to a Microsoft Word document, I would encourage them to just use Word Online. Now, if there's any other potentially involved assignments, may include tables, or charts, or figures. These are instances where the online version of Word may be a little bit lacking relative to the full desktop version of Word. But I do think by and large, this service will be fine for completing simple assignments online. Okay. So with that said, I hope you found this presentation very useful to you. This will also help you serve our underrepresented Chromebook users and make this transition to online as smooth as possible during the spring 2020 semester. All right. So with that, you have a great day and take care.